Hi everybody, it's Dee Dee, and my lighting is terrible in here. I want to tell you Sophie's story, and this is in regards to a cult, what I believe is a cult known as the Bill Gothard extremist fundamentalist cult. I'm going to call it a cult with the risk of people that know about it and have raised their children in it getting angry at me, because I'm sure people will, because it's very controversial and very upsetting to those who actually were involved in it. They don't like hearing it called a cult, but as far as I'm concerned, it very much had extremely cultic belief systems. So I want to share Sophie's story. I named her Sophie because she doesn't want to be, having her real name displayed here in any way, shape, or form. So I'm going to start out by kind of explaining exactly what I'm talking about. Some of you have heard of Bill Gothard, and others of you don't know who the heck I'm talking about. Bill Gothard was, I don't even remember the year or the era he was really popular in, but he was a Christian fundamentalist, kind of very strict Baptist-y type person. And my friend Sophie was kind of raised under his teachings. So we'll start with kind of the way first of all, what it was called and the way that it operated. What Bill Gothard's actual place was, where he operated out of, was called the Institute of Basic Life Principles. Don't ask me exactly where it was located. I'm not exactly sure. I don't have all the deets on everything. I'm just telling you some of the abusive things that went on and how it affected Sophie's life, okay? Well, it was kind of like this boom in media, I guess you could call it, where he was kind of promoted through the media as being someone that helped people in relationships, in families, that sort of thing. And he used testimonials. Of course, you guys have heard me talk about how people manipulate through testimonials. Through this person was struggling in this area, and then they found blah, blah, blah. He did that. He used testimonials. Some of the things he touted with his testimonials were that he could help you conquer bad habits, resolve family conflicts or relationship conflicts. He would teach you how to be pleasing to God, and other things, how to discipline your children, how to raise a happy family, those kind of things, how to break rebellion, all those things. There was also something called the Children's Institute that was run through him, but we'll get into that a little bit later. His whole premise was protecting children from the ways of the world. Now, I'm not totally saying all of the teachings were bad, because you know me, I'm a Bible believer, so I believe a lot of the biblical scriptures that mandate certain things, and we'll get into exactly what I mean by that as I go along. So Bill Gothard also had this thing called the ATI, or the Advanced Training Institute, and that was where more of the advanced people, I believe, went once they were fully ingrained in the Bill Gothard doctrine, I suppose. Oh, no, wait, I'm sorry. I stand corrected. That came a little bit later. The Advanced Training Institute was his homeschooling curriculum. That's what that was. I get a little bit confused because there's the IBLP, which is the Institute of Basic Life Principles, and the ATI was the Advanced Training Institute. And then there were the kids' things that he did. So there's also the Children's Institute, which I told you about that. Now, the Children's Institute was known for teaching unquestioned obedience. Bill Gothard, if you want to know a little bit more about who he was that made him important, you guys ever go to hotel rooms? And there used to be, years ago, I don't know if there is anymore, these little Bibles. They're like black or brown, or sometimes they're different colors. And it has it looks like a little torch flame, and it says Gideon's. Bill Gothard was responsible for those. He was responsible for the Gideon's Bible. So he's a big wig. He was a big name. Everybody knew him. I didn't know everybody knew him because I was quite young at the time he was popular, so I wouldn't have known that. I just found that out today doing my research. Anyways, also, Bill Gothard went to Wheaton College. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Wheaton is a college in Illinois. And you know I'm from Illinois, so that obviously is near and dear to my heart because it's in my area. He started out doing small groups. A lot of things start very small and grow and bloom into huge endeavors. His promise was that you obey God and He will reward you. Motel 6 saved your life. Okay. Good to know, Gladys. I'm glad your life got saved. We wouldn't want to lose you. Anyway, his promise was obey God. He will reward you and give you blessings if you do exactly what He says. And that type of teaching was taken into the churches from all of Bill Gothard's things that he did. So there were basically 7 principles of the Gothard training. 1 is design. 2 is authority and the umbrella of protection. Many of you have heard me mention that and talk about it. That was basically his biggest thing, was you must obey authority. You must submit under authority. You must come under leadership, that sort of thing. Responsibility, ownership, suffering, freedom, and success. Those were the 7 precepts of the Gothard movement, I guess you could say. As time went on, there was something called the quiverful movement. There is a Bible verse that says, "Blessed is the man whose quiver is full," which meant the more kids you had, the more blessed you were. Children were like arrows, basically, is the way it was looked at. And the guy that carries around the most arrows, he's the most blessed by God. So thus we have the Duggar family. You guys are familiar with them. And I just got done watching Shiny Happy People on Amazon Prime. And if you get a chance to watch it and you're interested, you might want to watch it and become aware of exactly what went on behind the scenes with all that mess. Some of it I won't even talk about because it's absolutely too deplorable. For instance, the whole Josh Duggar issue was beyond. I mean, I knew he was in trouble for something, but when I researched a little farther, not too far enough that I found out what it was about, it turned my stomach. It made me sick and made me want to throw up. I hope you're not eating. I apologize if you are, but it literally made me sick, the stuff that man was involved in, while putting on this air of being a genuine godly person. Okay, so I'm going to kind of contrast the Gothard teachings with my views. Okay, so here we go. And my views have to do with Sophie, my friend I'm going to tell you about. So one of the things that Gothard taught was that Cabbage Patch dolls were evil. And the guy that created them was a warlock and practiced witchcraft. So as a result, Sophie's parents, I meant to say, burned her toys. They burned them completely. Just got rid of all of her. Somebody gave her a Cabbage Patch doll. They burned it. Somebody gave her brother a Ninja Turtle toy. They burned it. They got rid of it because a warlock created it. And then magic and witchcraft would get into the house. So as a result, Sophie grew up not really being allowed to play with much of anything. Anything that evoked an imagination or creativity, something like that, that was gotten rid of. Sound familiar? 12 Tribes ring a bell? Yeah, similar. Obviously, I clearly have the view that is very, very wrong. Although I will say there were certain toys I would not let my children play with that were blatantly related to the occult, and I would not promote that. I did not burn their toys, however. I might get rid of them, but I would not burn them. I would probably give them to a Goodwill or something like that. Yeah. Anyway, another Gothard teaching, homeschooling idea, that homeschooling is God's main idea for kids. They need to be homeschooled. Do not put them in the public school because they'll learn all kinds of extra things that are not God's plan. Okay, my view on that is I agree that some kids do better with homeschooling than they do in the public schools. There are some children, however, that can thrive in the public school system if you root them and ground them in your Bible ideas and your beliefs before they get there. Then they will, train up a child in the way they should go. When they're old, they will not depart from it. You have to build them up in a standard of perception and thinking that helps them resist the things that are not of God. That's how that works. So my view of it is that homeschooling is not entirely a terrible idea. I did it with my daughters, Carol and Randy. However, I put my other daughters, Anna and Amber, into public school. And they did just fine. And Amber actually is a minister today. So you can't really say, well, if you go to public school, you're going to turn out horrible and you'll serve the devil or something like that. Not true. But Gothard taught that public schools would brainwash kids and make them think, opposing to God and the Bible standards. Okay, the ATI, I got to look it up and see what Advanced Training Institute, trained people to be leaders who strictly follow Gothard's principles, some of which were Bible principles, but distorted in Gothard's special way that he decided to distort them. There was something that Gothard put out called the Wisdom Booklet, and it was used in the homeschooling setting, instead of textbooks. And he often used things like the Sermon on the Mount to teach children only Gothard's ideas and not allowing children to think for themselves or to question the things. The whole idea was unquestionable obedience by the children towards the parents, period. They didn't have to agree with what the parents wanted, but they were not to voice that or oppose the parent in any way, shape, or form, or swift discipline would be delivered. Now, my view on that, I would be in agreement with many of Gothard's principles only because they are Bible principles, not because they're his, such as authority bringing safety. I do believe you should submit to authorities, not corrupt authorities, but authorities that follow God's plan and authorities that are looking out for your best interest. Yes, you shouldn't rebel against every authority out there. So in a sense, I do agree with that. Okay. My view, Gothard's view was that evolution did not exist, never happened, only creation is what matters. Here's my view. Creation is definitely more important to me than evolution, but I do believe there were dinosaurs. I do believe there were fossils and such. There were different creatures that existed years ago. I do believe that, for sure. I don't think that literally the only thing that happened was God created the earth and, the way that they say in the beginning, God did this, poof, and it was. I do believe that happened, but I don't believe that evolution is a lie. I think things do evolve. I think that just the fact that a tadpole turns into a frog is evolution. That animal evolved. The tadpole evolved from a tadpole into a frog. The butterfly evolves from a caterpillar into a butterfly. Things evolve. I do believe in that form of evolution. So I don't totally discount anything ever evolving. So I wouldn't agree with him in that sort of thing. In fact, my favorite dinosaur is a Stegosaurus, just in case you were wondering. Okay. So another thing that Gothard taught was people had to have certain hairstyles. And this was more focused, in fact, mostly focused on females rather than males. So the women, the young girls, they had to dress modestly. They had to wear certain types of garments. A lot of them wore what you saw the Duggars wear, long dresses, long skirts, their hair long, that sort of thing, or in a bun or whatever, kind of like the LDS, Latter-day Saints, kind of do that. And actually 12 tribes also. So it was kind of like the whole thing, if you have the long hair, it should be kept put up, or if you have short hair, you don't have to worry about it. But if your hair's long, then let it be shorn or wear it up or back or whatever. So kind of the same type of thing. A lot of cults believe that. Clothes. They also were taught, like I said, to dress modestly. They had to have clothes like dresses that were long so they covered their knees, that sort of thing. Again, a very cultic type of tactic, although I'm not saying women should never wear long skirts, because I love wearing long skirts. But there is no mandate that you have to dress that way all the time. Pants were definitely frowned on for sure. Now, my view on that. I do agree with modest dressing for women. I think women should not be showing off their cleavage. I do not think women should be wearing skirts that show off their bottom to the world. I think there should be a modicum of modesty in women, for sure. I agree with that part. Okay, the reason why Gothard's Institute taught this was because they taught about the harlot in the book of Proverbs and how she would wink with her eye and just kind of do things to lure the man that was unawares, so to speak, into her den of sin. And they taught that women were very capable of doing this, and that if a woman wore a skirt, for instance, that was too short, well, something happens to that woman, it's her own fault, she shouldn't have dressed like that. That type of attitude. Blaming the victim, which a lot of people on here on YouTube do not like, I'm sure. Okay. Gothard said that women are to be meek. That's why when you watch the Duggars, the mother sounds like that. She sounds like she's so sweet, kind of like Snow White. Just this very pretty, perky, meek little woman that has no opinion of her own, except she looks up to her husband with very respectful and awe looks and just waits and hangs on his every word because he is the leader of the house. Yeah, that sort of thing. That's something that Gothard taught, that women were to be meek and not question their husbands and not argue with their husbands and not have an opinion of their own, period. Or if you did have an opinion, what your husband said goes. Even if it's against the Bible, who cares? He's the man of the house. He'll answer to God for it. I remember being told that myself growing up. Well, if your husband's wrong, God will deal with him. Yeah, but what if he's telling me something blatantly to do against the Bible? Well, then you just leave him to God. He will talk to him. If you trust that your husband hears from God, he'll tell him. Okay. Anyway, enough on that subject. All right. And so you saw a lot of women come out of the Gothard era with little girl voices and sounding very meek and very timid. And a lot of the Gothard children, their daughters sounded like that too, because they trained them to be that way. We'll talk more about how that training happened in just a moment, because it started very, very young, much younger than you might think. Okay, Gothard taught about spiritually cleansing demons out of the house. Okay, what is my view? I do believe that that's a thing. I think evil spirits can come into houses, and even the Native Americans will light sage to drive demonic forces out of the house or out of some area. I still believe in that. I still believe in praying and telling demons to leave my home. I do. I make no apologies. I'm not weird or crazy for doing it. I just know the forces of evil because I used to mess with them back in the day. And I know they do come in and torment people and try to ruin relationships and destroy things. So I do tell them to get out of my house, for sure. So I agree with that part. All right. So one of the things about Gothard that he was accused of was he taught with fear. He taught the kids to fear the parent and also to fear that they were going to go to hell if they did any little thing wrong. Now, I've confronted a lot of people on here lately about some of the actions that I've seen. I'm not saying I don't love you, God doesn't love you, and you're going to hell if you keep doing that. That's up to him. That is not up to me. Do I believe hell is a literal place? I don't know. I haven't been there. Hope to God to never find out that it is on a first-hand basis. I do believe that hell is separation from God. That I do believe. I believe you will be eternally separated from your Creator if he decides that based on whatever he deems was offensive to him and caused you to be eternally lost, that sort of thing. But we won't know till we get there, so we're not going to elaborate on that point. Okay, so a lot of the people that were going through the Gothard stuff were like very debilitated because they thought every time they did something wrong, oh my gosh, I'm in danger of hellfires now. I didn't grow up that way. I did not. I did run to confession a lot because I was a good little Catholic girl and I felt like, oh my gosh, I don't want to have sin on my soul. I don't want to make God sad or whatever. But as far as like literally feeling like you can't move or breathe because you might have done something wrong and oh my gosh, I'm doomed forever. No, I don't believe that. Okay, the Gothard Institute taught the daughters to care for younger children. Like if the mother, the whole belief was blessed is the man that has his quiver full, which means have as many children as you possibly can have, and then have the older children raise the younger children for you. And a lot of people I met over the years when this whole Gothard thing was common believed that way. Like, oh, we're just going to have tons of children. That way the older kids can take care of the younger kids. That's not your children's job. That's your job. Now, did I follow that? Yes, I did, because I knew about these teachings and I believed a lot of them, but more so because I believed the Bible told me that's what was supposed to happen. And it was a twisted version of the Bible that I believed. So I would let my kids kind of take care of their brothers and sisters quite a bit. And I would just kind of check out and go do who knows what. But that's because I believe that's what their purpose was. They were put there to help raise their brothers or sisters. And a lot of people believed that back then. I was born in '66, so this kind of happened, I think, in the '70s and '80s. So you can imagine. All right. As a result, when you expect that of a daughter or a son, they grow up way too fast. You parentify them. You put them in a place of a parent that they should never be put in. And do I have regrets of doing that? I sure do. I have lots of regrets regarding my kids and things I could have done better by them, but I didn't know. I also was under a lot of delusive beliefs and things back then. Okay. Um, so, yeah, you're putting too much responsibility on kids to be having them raise your other kids. Gothard Institute believed in spanking them in such a way that as you're spanking them, now I'm doing this for your own good. What you did grieved me and it grieved God. And I'm just doing this so that you understand that this is something we cannot do anymore. And now from now on, you're going to be a good boy or a good girl, and you're going to obey the Bible, and you're not going to question mommy or daddy. And you're smacking them the whole time you're saying this. And then when you're done spanking them, and they're not allowed to cry either, because if they start crying, you spank them harder till they stop. That's the belief of Bill Gothard. Yeah, great teaching. Anyway, and then you look at the baby or the kid, kid, whatever. It started young. You started even as young as 6 months old, he advocated using the rod on the child. Again, sound familiar? 12 tribes? Yeah, similar. So they would look at the child and they'd say, okay, now give mommy or daddy a hug. And the kid would hug, but it would be weak. And then you'd say, no, I don't think you really meant that hug. Try that again. And then they would hug you again. And until you were convinced that their spirit was broken and they would pretty much melt in your arms, then you just kept spanking them till they gave in, I guess. I mean, yeah. Did I do this to my kids? No, I did not. That I didn't do. I do not agree with that at all. But I will tell you more about how that affected me, that whole belief system. Okay, so for me, personally, my view of it was I would go from spankings to sitting on the chair to corners, stand in the corner, writing assignments, and then I'd go back to spanking again. My problem was when I would spank my child, I would feel extremely guilty. I couldn't stand hearing them cry. I felt like an awful person. I still do not believe in spankings to this day. To me, it just made me feel wrong and evil. I didn't like doing it. But I was being told, even at the churches I went to, spare the rod, spoil the child, except that's not what the scripture says. They totally changed that around. It's if a man spares the rod, he causes the child to rebel, or I don't remember how it all goes. I'll have to look that up. But it's not spare the rod, spoil the child. That's something someone took and ran with it and just used that to justify hitting a kid in frustration. And then they would say dumb things like, well, you should never spank your child in frustration. Go and calm down first so you can administer the spanking in the proper way. Oh my gosh, who comes up with this garbage? Anyway, how about that child has a right to feel safe around you, and you don't have a right to hit them and inflict pain on them? No, I do not believe that corporal punishment is okay. I don't anymore. Like I said, I went back and forth with it because I was so torn. And then in between spanking, I would go to the library and I'd get these books, Discipline with Love, Discipline Without Hurting, whatever it was. And then I would not spank them the next time, and then I'd go back to spanking. So my kids got a very inconsistent idea of what discipline was because I was so torn in myself about what I really believed in doing. All right, so another thing that always bothered me, and Sophie told me this, when she would get spanked, and I hate calling it spanking, when she would get abused by being hit, because it's not spanking. Spanking to me should not even be a word. It should have never been invented, period. There are better ways to discipline your kids than hitting them. I will never agree that that's okay. I just don't. Anyway, when Sophie would get hit, she would be crying because she'd get hit really severely. And the response of the parent after she gave her unwilling hug that she had to fake that she was willing was, okay, that's it. Dry up. That's enough. Stop crying or I'm going to give you something else to cry about. What? You just inflicted pain on me and you're telling me not to emote because of it. That's sick, people. That's just sick. And if you're doing that to your child, I encourage you to get help right now, because there is nothing right about that. There is nothing godly about that whatsoever, as far as I'm concerned. Okay. Let's see. All right, so Gothard Institute taught, I told you that this discipline started very young. There was something called blanket training. You guys remember when I did the whole Shanann Watts thing and I had a big old fit about the whole Baby Wise thing? Okay, well, apparently Baby Wise, or some form of it, was taught by the Bill Gothard Institute too, in their little child raising training. So what you did was you laid an infant, 6 months old at least, on the blanket, and you would put a toy off the blanket out of their reach, just slightly out of their reach. And they would crawl over and want to play with the toy. And as soon as they went to reach for it, you smacked them. And then that baby would pull their hand back and look confused probably. But then they'd smile and get happy and they'd reach for the toy again and you smack them again. And it was to break their will, to get them to stop reaching, to get them to stop trying to get what they wanted. It makes me sad. It makes me want to cry when I even think about that kind of garbage. So parents, if you want to call them that, well-meaning parents, would use this blanket technique. And those children would grow up to be very silent and submissive, because they would learn that either you got your hand smacked or you got beat with a rod if you tried to get anything that they didn't want you to have, the parent didn't want you to have. And yeah, it was very, very effective out of fear. Who wants to get hit every time they go to reach for something? You can imagine what that does to a kid's spirit and how that affects an adult growing up. That they learn that anytime they reach for something they want, there's going to be a harsh consequence. Sickening, very sickening. Anyway, that was called blanket training. And apparently the Duggars used this, which is why all their kids were just like, yes, mommy, yes, ma'am, yes, sir. Yeah, that's why. Because they feared the parent, the sperm donor, egg donor. Let's call it what it is, okay? I don't consider a parent to be a parent who does that willingly and doesn't repent of it, okay? Or doesn't feel bad about it. Okay, Sophie told me a story about when her mom, she lived with her mom, and her baby would scream and cry and wouldn't lay down to take a nap, and Sophie's mom would tell her to go in there and smack the baby, the 6-month-old baby, on the leg, and make the baby lay down, grab the baby and force the baby to lay down for the nap. So Sophie went in there and she'd smack the baby, but she wouldn't smack the baby hard because that's her baby. Why would she smack her own baby? She felt bad about it. She'd go out and the baby would still be crying, and she'd say, her mother would say, did you spank that baby? And she'd be like, yeah, I did. She'd say, you've got to go out and you got to go in there and spank her so it hurts. It has to sting or she's not going to obey you. So then the mother would go in there, Sophie's mother, and smack the baby on the leg and force the baby to lay down, and then the baby would quiet down and go to sleep. Same idea as blanket training. Sickening, 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 and cruel. Absolutely cruel. So anyway, yeah, I'm incensed over it. It makes me absolutely disgusted that Sophie had to go through something like that, and she felt awful about it. Other things were used, such as pinching, pulling hair, grabbing the back of the hair on the nape of the neck and twisting to get kids to mind and to listen and to submit. Cruel. Just absolutely cruel. I think it's sick. Anyway, poor Sophie had to go through being raised that way, and it very much affected her, and that was all Bill Gothard training. Thank you, evil demon Bill Gothard. Anyway, so that's just some things that happened to kids since they were little babies. Let me see. What else? Okay. There was another thing that Sophie did when she would bring her children. Oh, no, actually, when Sophie was a child herself, her mother would make her sit in the corner of a room with her toys, the toys that were allowed, and make her play only in this corner of the room. If Sophie got past the corner, she was beaten and told to go sit where she belonged. And then she would go back to her corner and only pull the toy box toys out as far as this line on the carpet. So, yeah, some visitors that went to Sophie's house, their children were made to do the same thing. And those visitors were absolutely shocked. And they reported the situation, but nothing was done because where they lived, that was kind of like a smack on the hand and ignore it. So yeah, that's sad. Anyway, poor Sophie. Poor Sophie's kids later on, because Sophie didn't really realize a lot of this stuff was so bad, and she went to the same trainings and learned to do the same with her kids and didn't fight it so much. And so her kids were succumbing to a lot of the same abuse. All right. Sophie was also beaten with a coat hanger on a regular basis. If her mother got mad, she would just throw her over a chair, a table, the floor, whatever, and just start whipping her with a metal coat hanger. Kind of like Mommy Dearest type of thing. Yeah, that was the real life Mommy Dearest. And again, thank Bill Gothard for that one. Gotta love these cults, not. Okay, dating. Let's talk about dating. Bill Gothard taught that if you were going to find your mate eventually in life, you didn't date, you courted. That means you did not date anybody you were not absolutely sure you wanted to marry. And the dating period did not last long. I remember, I think Sophie told me they courted for a year and they got engaged for 6 months, and they immediately got married because it was better to marry than to burn with lust one for another. That's what the Bible said. So that's what they did. Now, who chose the year and a half? I don't know, but even I followed that because that's what I was taught years ago, that you court for a year and you wait another half a year and then you get married. And that's what I did. So, yeah. Do I agree with it? I don't know. I don't agree that kids should not be able to date when they're not kids, but teenagers when they're of age. First of all, with supervision until they're adult age, and then on their own once they're adults, because you really can't control that. They're legal. They can do what they choose to do. Okay, and I always believe that if you take away all the freedoms of a child to think for themselves, when they're older, they're going to rebel. They're going to go think for themselves anyway. They're going to be like, man, I'm glad to get out from under their jurisdiction and go make my own choices. Okay. Also, Gothard taught that the man needed to ask the father's permission to court and marry the daughter. Do I agree with that? I think it's good. I think that's a nice tradition that the boyfriend goes or the fiance asks the parents' permission to, seal the marriage covenant. I think that's a good idea. I don't have a problem with that. I don't think that was abusive. Also, Bill Gothard taught that there should be a chaperone during even the engagement period. I don't think so. I think if you're engaged, especially after courting for a year, you should be able to handle your engagement period on your own. Because hopefully by that time you're an adult anyway, and whatever good precepts and standards you were taught, you will maintain. Okay. Gothard taught that if a husband is violent, it's the wife's fault. You're probably just not submitting to your husband. I was told that. The reason my husband didn't come to church is because you're not submissive enough. You go home and submit to him, and you're going to see the Lord work on his heart like you can't even imagine. 23 years later, yeah, that didn't work. Okay. There were rules in the Gothard trainings that if a wife was unruly and did not submit to her husband, He was okay to spank her, turn her over his knee and spank her, his wife. Do we ask why there is spousal abuse in some of these generations gone by? There you go. So also there were rules in the Gothard material of after the wife was disciplined by the husband, aka spanked over his knee with a paddle or whatever, that there was a decision of whether she deserved to have his kisses or not after that, or whether they would be romantic after that, or how long after that. This is just sick stuff, y'all. Sick stuff. Really. Ew. Did I agree with that? Heck no, never, ever, ever. Okay, Gothard taught that the father controls his daughter's intimacy level, we'll say that, who she's attracted to and how she expresses that attraction. The father controlled everything. My view, okay, well, in my case, well, actually, we'll talk about Sophie. So Sophie one day wanted to go swimming, and her swimsuit was getting kind of, tattered. And so she went to her mom and said, "Mom, I need a new swimsuit." She goes, "Well, we will bring your father with us, and he can approve or disapprove your suit." So Sophie was made to model in front of her father to get her swimsuit approved. And the only thing he approved was a one piece. There were no bikinis allowed. Do I agree with that? Depends on Sophie's age, I guess. Depends on the type of bikini. Do I agree with these bikinis that cut your chest in half and show everything? Heck no. No, not for a Bible following Christian or a Bible following Messianic or a Bible following spiritual person. No. We are called to be separate. We're called to be different. We are called to a certain level of modesty and not looking like the world. So do I think that a slim cut bikini that may as well just be a thread should be worn by somebody claiming to follow the Bible? No, I do not. That's absolutely not okay. So did I have an issue when Sophie told me her father did that? It was odd. I had never heard of that before, but Sophie respected her father, and honestly, I think that kind of kept her pure, maybe longer than most kids her age. I think it taught her a level of modesty. Now, if Sophie was an adult, should she bring daddy there to approve her swimsuits? No, I don't think so. I think adults can choose for themselves. I would hope that Sophie would still be modest in her choices somewhat, but when you're an adult, you're an adult. You get to do what you want by law. Okay, Gothard had something called the prayer room punishment area, where you would be locked in a room with only like very little furniture to no furniture for hours and hours at a time to pray. And then you would come out and they would drill you to make sure you were repentant of whatever it was you did. And if you didn't seem repentant enough, guess where you got put right back into? Yes, the prayer room, to go and repent some more. Again, 12 tribes-ish? Yes, definitely, and other cults. Okay, so my view on that was Sophie did not tell me anything about her parents doing anything of the sort like that to her, but she had known other people that were part of the Gothard trainings where their parents did do that kind of thing. Sometimes they'd even send them to bed without supper. I was trained in the whole going to bed without supper thing, so yes, I did occasionally do that to my own kids, but not often. Doesn't make it right. It's cruel. I'm sorry for a lot of the things I did to my kids. I didn't like abuse them, like beat the snot out of them or anything. But some of the teachings I was taught in the church were wrong too. Okay. I'm ignoring you, Gladys, because everything you're saying has absolutely nothing to do with what I'm talking about. And like I said, I have a feeling I know who you are. So, Gothard Institute taught, or not taught, they took the money that people would send to them for these seminars and the trainings and the institutes and all that stuff. And Bill Gothard's family would live high on the hog, while Bill apparently would drive around in a cruddy looking car, giving the impression that he was living, a very humble life, while all of the people in his family were living high on the hog with all the richest of everything, with the people's money that they were donating to these seminars and stuff. While the families that were paying for all these materials and seminars and homeschooling trainings were struggling because they were not well to do and they could barely afford this stuff. But here they are fueling Gothard's family to live high on the hog. That's just wrong. Absolutely wrong. Okay, so one of Gothard's lovely friends that supported him was the CEO, David Green of Hobby Lobby. Anybody ever heard of Hobby Lobby? Yeah, he supported Gothard. Gothard's teachings eventually spread all around the world, into the military, into prisons, into churches, many different places. So this dude was not small pickings. He was like really, really well known. His teachings were well known and well adhered to by many people. Let's see. Bill and Steve Gothard, years later, were accused of having inappropriate relationships and inappropriate touching of some of the young children, the girls especially, that came to the Gothard Institute, the Children's Gothard Institute. They would tell the child to pray, and then they would start putting their hand on them and like rubbing the back of their hand, and then the rubbing from the hand went to the leg, and you get the drift. I don't have to be specific. Inappropriate touching. Him and his brother, Bill Gothard and Steve Gothard. Inappropriate. They instituted a new teaching based on Matthew 18 about not gossiping. Do you know why they instituted this teaching? To keep the women and the girls silent, to not talk about the abuses that they suffered, so that nobody would get in trouble from the Gothard Institute. Yeah. Okay. Gothard Institute also did this thing called Journey to the Heart. This was where they would, I guess, choose a young girl, to go one-on-one with Bill, and he would teach them personally, and this is where a lot of this stuff went on. Bill always taught people to repopulate the earth. He trained the girls in this. He trained the women in this. Yet, interestingly enough, Bill himself never got married and never had any children of his own. So he would drive around in a van or ride in a van, and he would be touching the girls while riding around in the van. And most of them were under the age of 18, apparently. In fact, I guess all of them were under age 18. So another thing that Bill did was he would call up the parents, and he would tell the parents things about how the child was having problems and wanting to submit to them better, so that Bill was going to teach them how to be more submissive before he sent them home. Well, then he would tell the child, your father is not your authority. I am now. You know, he gave up his authority because he didn't know how to be a good authority. So now I am your dad. I'm the person that you submit to. Yeah, see how crafty he was? So he would touch the girls' hair, their shoulders, their thighs inappropriately. He actually told, hang on a second, the one girl that he had under his care, I say that extremely loosely, hey, he had talked to her father and told him, I'm only sending her home if you can be the husband or the father that you need to be. You need to discipline her harshly. You need to make it hurt. You need to discipline and leave marks. These are the kind of things this idiot taught. Seriously, no wonder Sophie grew up really messed up, even with her own children. And then when he told the father that, the girl would go home, and guess what happened? Yeah, elevated abuse of the girls. Definitely. Sickening. Again, sick. All right. There was also a teaching by Gothard that if a woman was attacked in any way and didn't cry out, didn't oppose it, didn't say stop, or didn't realize what she did to tempt the person to attack her, then the attack was her fault. So a woman gets attacked, and you know what I mean by attacked, so I don't have to say the word. I don't like saying that word in here, especially on internet. If a woman is attacked in a inappropriate connective way, we'll say. And she does not cry out and say stop, apparently, and oppose it. Which, remember, these women were taught to submit. From the time they were babies, they were taught to submit and not argue and not have a voice. So now it's her fault. She's being attacked because she didn't stop it. She didn't say, no, don't do this to me. They've actually interviewed girls that this happened to, and they told how they felt like something was wrong, but they had it so ingrained in them not to oppose authority that they didn't scream out because they didn't know to. They didn't feel they had a right to do that. But yet then it was turned on them. Well, you didn't tell me not to. You didn't stop me. You didn't scream. You didn't say you didn't want this. And besides, look how you were dressed. You had on a short skirt, or, you moved your leg a certain way, and it made me want you in that way. So then they were blamed for the attack. You brought it on yourself. Shame on you. So they were taught also that if you were attacked in this way, well, you must be really special to God, because that's a really, tough thing to go through. So God must have a lot of favor on you to allow you to experience something like this. Do you see the twisted, demented garbage that was being taught and still is being taught, apparently? I think the Institute still exists under different people. I have to look that up. I'm not sure. Okay, so years later, or whenever this happened, Gothard allegedly attacked a woman, and there was allegations that were specific against him, apparently, by this woman. So they took him out of running the Institute. They booted him right out of there. I don't know where he went. I have no idea. I don't think charges were pressed. I have no idea. I'd have to look that up as well. I don't know every single in and out of this. I'm just telling you kind of the general gist of this whole thing. At any rate, he was no longer running the Institute. However, his teachings continued on from the Institute under different leaders. And as I told you, these teachings went all around the world and into the military and into the churches and into who knows where. Probably Christian schools. For all I know, most likely, there's probably some Christian schools that teach this stuff. I will say this, okay? I'm done, actually. The one thing I do disagree with is that in this documentary, Shiny Happy People, about the Duggars and about the Bill Gothard Institute and the people that were abused in it and affected by it, the one thing I do disagree with is they were portraying Bible concepts in general as wrong because Gothard twisted them and used them for his own means to control people and women and families, basically to get money out of them, to abuse them for his own pleasure, whatever. The fact is, the Bible, the Word of God, as some people call it, Torah, the New Testament, the Old Testament, the Bible, existed long before Gothard even existed. So to say all these teachings are wrong, that no, making sure that we didn't wear, clothes that were provocative, that's wrong because Gothard said it and we felt controlled by that. No, I don't agree with that. I think there are certain Bible precepts of modesty, of obedience to parents, of discipline in a balanced way that are biblical. So I'm not going to, as they say, throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is a horrible phrase I hate. I'm not going to discount the whole thing and say, well, because Gothard taught these Bible concepts, it's wrong because it came from him. No, it's not. There were certain things in the Bible I adhered to and I agree with. Abuse of children is not one of them. So let me tell you, as a result of all of the of all of the Duggars' teachings and belief in all of this stuff and raising their kids with the blanket techniques and strict beatings and all that stuff and raising little meek, mousy kids. As a result of that, one of their children ended up doing something very horrible. They couch it in the term of, I won't even say the word, but inappropriate viewing of things happening to children. Okay, we'll say it that way. But it went beyond that. It was horrible things, deadly things happening to children, infants, babies, little girls, little boys, little baby girls and boys. And this guy thought that was something that he could be attracted to. And he ended up in jail. I'm pretty sure he's in prison now. Yeah. when you put something on a child, and they're not the only family this happened in, when you put some strict rules on a child to the point where it breaks their spirit, breaks their will, breaks them as a human being, and messes them up in their head, very often things like this happen. Am I blaming everything that the guy chose to do on the Gothard stuff? Not necessarily. Obviously, he probably had some mental messed up something in the upstairs to be doing that kind of stuff. There was another family called the Willis family where the son rose up and shot the brother and the mother and killed them. Again, the same type of strict, crazy type of upbringing for sure. Some of my own upbringing, mostly with the church and some of the church beliefs, definitely caused me to do things that I regret, and caused my kids some problems and caused me some problems. And yeah. And now I'm looking back and it's all starting to come together for me in a lot of reasons, in a lot of ways, because I was raised in some distorted ways by the church teachings. So anyway, I want to offer a disclaimer here. I purposely used the name Sophie to protect the innocent person and people involved in this. People that believed very highly in this Gothard training stuff. I'm not protecting his name because he is absolutely disgusting and despicable and twisted the Bible for his own agenda and really destroyed a lot of lives. But I purposely couched things and cloaked things, I guess the word is, in kind of almost a little bit of a cryptic way, because I'm not here to hurt people. I'm here to expose evil, to tell you that it is out there, and I'm pretty sure this Gothard stuff is still out there, still, even now, and people are probably still raising their kids under this stuff. So if you start hearing of strict discipline, unwavering obedience, these kind of terms, let your feelers go out and have it checked out. Investigate a little bit. Even if you don't do it personally, if you suspect there's something dangerous going on in a family or in a relationship with people, please step in. Don't be afraid to report. Don't be afraid to step in and save a life. Yeah. Anyway, I guess I've talked about that long enough. I hope you will say prayers for Sophie, because years later, she encountered some other families that raised their kids this way, and she was very hurt by one of those families, sadly, in many different ways. Unfortunately, Sophie had a really rough life. She's doing well now for herself. She is a minister, actually, herself. But, yeah, she asked me to not share her name or her specifics because, she's been through enough, and it's not fair. Anyway, I hope this sheds some light on the Bill Gothard cult and the cultic teachings that Sophie went through and many people have gone through. At first, I wasn't quite sure whether to be against the Gothard Institute and some of the teachings, but now I definitely know I am. There were some teachings that I have heard that are biblical. As I said, it wasn't all garbage. And honestly, that's the mark of a cult. Some of this stuff is legit, and it seems really, well, it's biblical. That's what the Bible says. That's what I was taught in church. So it can't be wrong because, he's using biblical principles. Just because something has some biblical principles does not mean that it's a good thing. Does not mean that you just jump in and say, oh, well, I'm just going to buy everything hook, line, and sinker because it looks biblical, because the other stuff is biblical. So I'm just encouraging you to use critical thinking. And if you sense something is a snake, it generally is. Just keep your feelers out, keep wise, and keep going forward. I always used to say eyes wide open, moving forward. I say that again, eyes wide open, moving forward. And hopefully now your eyes are wide open to the Bill Gothard stuff, the blanket technique, the caning of children, the abuse of children, the abuse of families, the unfair, ill-gotten gain from other people that are abused and used for evil people's purposes. If you were affected by this, I am super sorry that you had to go through that. I understand the pain. I've seen my friends suffer. I've suffered in some ways because of teachings that were not godly at all and not kind. So, yes, I pray peace upon you and your family. I pray that if you need help, that you're willing to reach out to a healthy counselor and ask for help. There's no shame in that whatsoever. If you need help, reach out for it. Anyway, this concludes my, I guess, commentary or whatever you want to call it on the Bill Gothard cult. I hope and pray that you are safe and well wherever you are today. And I pray Shabbat Shalom on you today, the peace of the Sabbath. And I will talk to you soon. Be blessed, everybody. Shalom. Thanks for listening.